yes, I am sitting in my car right now trying to film this video because I keep trying to film it and I cannot get it right. But guys, we have to talk about this idea of being unequally yoked. This is a question I get all the time. Like, should Christians really marry Christians? What does it mean to be unequally yoked? And I want to talk about this because I think there's more nuance that needs to be added to this conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Life Advice You Don't Hear in Church. My name's Tiffany Dawn, and hit subscribe if you're new here and want to see more videos like this. Okay, so being unequally yoked. For me, I grew up, and this is one of the biggest pieces of marriage advice I heard. It was safe sex for marriage and don't be unequally yoked. Find someone who's running after Jesus as hard as you are and marry them. The problem is, though, people don't run at the same pace for their whole life. The problem is we almost take this as this guarantee that if we find somebody who's a Christian now and seems sold out to the faith, they always will be. And that's not necessarily true. And so I want to dive deeper because I think, yes, this is helpful advice in a sense. This is a really important thing to consider. For example, James and I were both God is the first priority to us. Loving God and loving others and loving ourselves is what our lives boil down to. And we want to be with somebody who shares that, who gets that, who shares those priorities. And so I think for us, it was never a question of, should I marry a Christian? It was just, well, yeah, I want to share my life with somebody who has those same priorities. But we were too narrow in our thinking about this. But we thought there were guarantees that there weren't. So I want to talk about 3 things that we need to add to this conversation because, yes, it's definitely important to consider the faith of the person you marry. We talk about that. We have a whole section on that in my book, Before the Ring, and journaling and answering questions and prompts to figure out, are we connected? Are we on the same, reading out of the same book when it comes to faith and these big life priorities? But there's more to it than that. So let's talk about 3 buts. You can call this video Yes, but 3 things. So number 1, yes, look at their faith, but even more, look at their values, because this is the core of who a person is. And I think of this often in terms of fruits of the spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, but also, humility, gentleness, wisdom, generosity. These things are talked about in scripture over and over as such important values to have. And I think even more important than what box somebody checks on their eharmony profile, if they check the box Christian or Protestant or Catholic or blah, 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 more important is, what are their values? How do they live their life? And this is not a box you can check. This is not something a person can tell you about themselves. This is something you see and observe over time in the way they interact with people, in the way they live their lives in stressful moments. What are their values? Because people's faith can change. Here's the thing, when we got married almost 9 years ago, we had no idea that a few years in, I would start deconstructing my faith. And James had this freak out moment of, oh my gosh, is my wife going to lose her faith? And this was such a foundational part of our marriage. What would that even be like? And I didn't lose my faith. And he realized that I had a real relationship with God and I was just figuring things out, but I think it's important to realize you are not guaranteed a spouse who has the same faith they do today. It might not look the same. It might not be the same at all. You are not guaranteed that. And what is going to show you who they are at the core, the person that you marry, is not what box they check. It's not how involved they are at church. It's not that they go to a denomination that you like. It's their values. How do they live their life? Are they the kind of person you want to be married to? Are they the kind of person you'd want to be a parent to your kids one day if you have kids? Are they the kind of person you want to share the rest of your life with? And you see that in how they live their lives. I have known too many people who got married to a quote unquote strong Christian who ended up being a person with awful character. They were selfish. It was their way or the highway. They were arrogant, and they did it all under this context and pretext of Christianity, but their values did not match. Their values were not compatible. I think our values need to be the foundation way more than what box people are checking. That's not to say the box doesn't matter, because it does. But it's to say this is way more important. Who are we at the core? Okay, number 2, yes, consider their faith, but also rigidity is not a sign of spiritual maturity. Let me say that again. Rigidity around doctrinal and theological beliefs, for example, is not a sign of spiritual maturity. I think we live in a church culture where we've almost been programmed to think, oh my goodness, they know what they believe and they can say it forcefully and clearly and argue it, and they must be a strong Christian. And we've almost been told as women to look for a man like that. But guys, that is more a personality trait than spiritual maturity. In fact, that is a sign that someone is not yet spiritually mature in my book. If they can't listen to anyone else's perspective, they're threatened, they're loud, they're just constantly trying to fight for their point of view, that's not a good sign. We've been told it is, but it's not. I know person after person who's married to people like this and realized this wasn't so much that they had a strong faith, even though they are tied to their faith still, but it's more a sign that it's their way or the highway, that they don't have the humility of God to listen to other perspectives, to build bridges over burn bridges. I love how James says that the wisdom from above is gentle and peaceable and willing to yield. Are those the words you'd use to describe this person? Or is it like, nope, I've thought about it, it's my way? And guys, let me tell you, this is my personality trait. Like, I have this personality trait, like, nope, I've thought about it. How could anybody think differently than I do on this issue? Seriously, ask James. He'll tell you. It's true. It's something I have to work on and be aware of in our conversations. And James really helps pull me out of that and be like, sweetie, you're doing it again, because it's not fun to be married to someone who looks at life through that lens. And your faith should grow. It should change and evolve as you get older. What's a sign of living things? What sets them apart from dead things? They're growing, they're changing, they're adapting. And if our faith is not doing that, then I wonder if it's alive at all. Maybe that sounds really judgmental, but I just think it's something we should consider. Like, if your doctrinal theological beliefs are exactly the same as they've always been in every single area, that's interesting. Is your faith alive and well? Or do we feel like we have to be tied to this point because we have to be right? It's just something to consider. So I think for me, like, I see a guy who I thought about marrying, and I see how rigid he is. And that drew me to him at first. I was like, whenever I'd like have a question, be like, no, like, obviously it's this way, Tiff, like, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, wow, he's such a strong Christian and leader. And now I thank God I am not married to him, because when I went through the season of deconstruction, asking all these questions, I needed somebody like James with the humility and the grace to hold space for me and my questions, and not try to fix me, but talk with me through it and be there with me through it and love me through it and be like, God is working in your life through all of this. So rigidity is not a sign of spiritual maturity. And having all the answers is not a sign of spiritual maturity. Again, it comes down to loving God, loving others, loving ourselves, not having all the right doctrine, because none of us do. And as you grow older, what you believe will change. Okay, and here's the third thing. Yes, consider their faith, but realize their faith might not look the same as yours. It might not be expressed the same way. They might not go to the same denomination church as you. I get questions all the time. Like, I'm Protestant, he's Catholic. Can we work? My question is like, well, why not? Why wouldn't that work? Like, there are Catholics who love God with all their hearts. There are Protestants who love God with all their hearts. There are Baptists. There are Lutherans. Like, we are so too narrow in our understanding of equally yoked sometimes. It's like this idea, like, we have to be exactly the same, but no, it's not about being exactly the same. It's about being compatible, like having those shared values, being able to build a life together, wanting to be with this person. For James and I, like, we both went to different denominations, and we both had different beliefs theologically when we got together, and we still do today. I'll give you one example. When we were dating, we were talking, and James was like, I am not really comfortable with the idea of women pastors biblically. I was much more comfortable with it. We were at a different place, and if I had been feeling like I was supposed to be a woman pastor, then we would not have been compatible. But I didn't feel like I needed to, and I didn't feel like there was any reason why we shouldn't be together still. It was like, we have different ideas. Okay, we both love God. We're both growing. Neither of us has this all figured out. Anyway, there's a whole lot of room for nuance here. It's not about what denomination you check. And it's not about their faith being expressed the same way as yours. I remember being in high school, and I was like, I want a guy who's on fire for God, like raising his hands and singing and out there. My mom's like, you don't know what he's thinking about with his hands raised. Like, I'll never forget this. She's like, he could be thinking about what to make for dinner after the football game with his hands raised. You don't know what's going on in his head. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I realized like different people express their faith in different ways. Some people, like me, are very intuitive and emotional, and that's not a bad thing. It's beautiful. It's just one of many ways we connect with God and the world around us. But for us, it's easy to judge other people who might be a little more logical, like my husband in his connection with God. It's easy to judge them and think their walk with God isn't real. Well, it's not that it's not real. It's just looks different than yours. But isn't that true for all of us? The way I connect with my parents is different than how my sibling connects with my parents, because we're different people. We have different personalities. We express ourselves differently, and it's no different with God. So I think there's a danger here in thinking unequally yoked means we're the same. Our walks with God look the same. We're running as fast as each other. Oh my goodness, just throw that idea out. It's just too confusing. It's not about that. It's about, do you guys love God? Love others? Love yourselves? Right? Like, that's what it comes down to. It might play out differently, but you can see when somebody's living those values, even if it's lived a little differently than the way you do. So again, if you want to talk more about what do I look for in a spouse, check out my book, Before the Ring. It walks you through 25 things that are so important to consider as to whether or not you're compatible, if you have what it takes to create this healthy and happy marriage we all want. So comment below what you would add to this discussion. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye.